Good morning, children. We continue our discussions on If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. In the last two classes, we discussed the summary and then we moved to the themes and meanings of the novel. Today, we'll discuss the characters. So, we have already identified mainly the three characters: narrator, the reader, and the other reader. And now we move to a further explanation on these characters. Italo Calvino's two readers, man and woman, actually reflect his previous attachment to allegory and fable. So here we see that the reader aggressively pursues this elusive novel and presses forward to resolve the confusion of all those novels to his satisfaction, to his own satisfaction. And we see that at the same time he is pursuing Ludmilla, the other reader, carefully soliciting her telephone number at their first meeting and striving to know her better. And although only at the end that he acknowledges that he wants her as his mate. And Ludmilla represents the feminine approach to fiction and to life. She appreciates the driving force of a good novel and is happy, content, simply, as it is said in the novel, to observe its own growth like a tree and entangling as if of branches and leaves. And throughout this book, the woman reader, whether it is Ludmilla or an ideal reader imagined by one of the fictional authors of all those aborted novels, this woman reader is presented as receptive, unwilling to impose all those prejudgments, ready to follow where the story leads. And the real readers of the book, whether male or female, are invited to identify with the male reader. But it soon becomes clear that the true reader is a hermaphrodite. Ludmilla's sister, Ludmilla's sister, Notaria, seems to represent the critical mentality at its most confident, categorical, and dogmatic level. So she is not a reader at all. She is only a person using books to promote her own opinions and to provide something like a fodder for study sessions with like minded friends. And as such, she represents a temptation to the reader, who, being male, exhibits all those domineering attitudes, domineering tendencies, and inevitably he takes up with Rotaria, only to find that their frantic and short lived passion is thoroughly unsatisfying. For because she is all head and no heart, not even likable, and even much less lovable. So we see that the narrator is somewhat a satirical portrait of the author, that traditional, omniscient product provider and director of that reading experience. As you know, the story, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, for which he is responsible, for which this narrator is responsible, is the first of the 10 novel beginnings. It is as though we understand that Calvino has no more control over the situation. And Calvino here is adapting to his own purposes a narrative stance which resembles Geoffrey Chaucer's idea of framed stories, as you see in Canterbury Tales, like Chaucer the Pilgrim. Calvino has become a character in his own work, and like Chaucer's persona, he too has this great difficulty getting his story told. So, the pilgrim Chaucer is the victim of all those impatient fellow travelers. Just like that, Calvino is also victimized by his publisher, whose carelessness and disorderliness prevent readers from finishing the story, that particular story of man with the suitcase. Talking about the critical context, we can understand that well before he wrote this novel, Calvino demonstrated an interest in modern critical approaches such as semiotic theory of Saussure and structural linguistics, which was taken into an advanced stage by Roman Jacobson. And as you know, that one branch of this structuralist criticism has emphasized that reading is a kind of a creative, unrestrained response to writing, an idea which is endorsed with so many reservations, as you see in If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, sorry. And here we see that Calvino defies the reader's expectations because he believes that it they interrupt or impede a creative response, and he defies all those conventional rules of the novel. The author Calvino leaves the 10 stories to the reader to finish or not finish, and this strategy marks what is sometimes called the anti-novel, whose best practitioner is Alain Robe Grillet, who has gone much further than Calvino, who completely obliterated the familiar benchmarks of the novel. And you see that it is Calvino's awareness of this modern shift in critical emphasis from writing to reading that is something which differentiates him from Chaucer. In Chaucer, you see Or Chaucer portrays an author struggling to master that art of writing, while in Calvino's, we see that Calvino depicting the reader wrestling with the demanding art of reading. And both involve impatient audiences, but Calvino completely challenges his audience's motives. So, reading demands respect for the writer's art, but the reader must respect the art of reading too, which actually calls for much involvement, much active involvement, more creative approach from a reader than being a lazy reader. So, in Calvino's book, the journey is not that of a character in a railroad station, but it is the journey of the reader, a journey to which any reader can aspire. And talking about the plot of each of these partial narratives mimics those point of progression of the larger novel. For example, following chapter 1, the reader begins If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, in which a character embarks on an enigmatic journey, much like the reader himself or like the real life reader as well. And following chapter 2, the reader having just met Ludmilla, and there was this spark of romantic interest, and he begins reading outside the town of Malbork, uh, in which this apparent protagonist thinks about his own love interest. And all those remaining fragments follow a similar pattern, with a plot of each reflecting the theme or prevailing message of the chapter preceding and following it. Each novel within the novel supports the main idea of what has come before and what will come next. And this novel's strong narrative framework helps this progress of the plot. And you may know that this 10 story structure resembles that of the work of Boccaccio, that is the famous Decameron, in which we see the characters taking turns telling 10 stories each. But here we see that Calvino draws his narrative forward as each new story within a story leaves the reader hanging just at the point of climax. And in addition to its innovative narrative structure, Calvino's novel offers a critical analysis of the relationship between author, reader, and text. So here Calvino draws heavily on the criticism of Roland Barthes, who is one of the foremost figures of the postmodernist movement in the mid 20th century. He has his famous essay, Death of the Author, where he explains that death of the author is the reader's birth. And Calvino here experiments with this death, birth, death cycle. And he tries to craft his narrative to eliminate the presence of an author figure. So his intention in this particular novel is to replace the author's figure, and instead of those voice of a single author, reader hears various voices scattered among the multiple, what you say, that multiple false starts within the novel. So here the author is dead and the reader is born. This novel's unusual construction is successful because of this unusual construction, and he is also largely indebted to Barth's theory of reading as a pleasurable bodily experience, as he narrates in his text, The Pleasure of the Text, where he explains that while pleasure corresponds to a readerly text in which the role of the reader is unchallenged, jouissance or bliss corresponds to a writerly text, which tries to transcend all those standard textual structures and frees the reader. So, this idea is also taken up in this novel. So, here we see that the narrative framework of If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, in which we see all those incomplete text, which encapsulates a theme of sexual desires and delayed fulfillment, shatters all those traditional writer reader roles, and brings the reader closer to what is known as jouissance or bliss. That is why it has this unusual construction, and along with that, this is successful because of Calvino's precise use of language and his development of a distinct philosophy of language. According to Calvino, language, and written language in particular, is the reader's bridge to the world outside. So he believes that repetition is the surest way of arriving at a meaning. However, we see that Calvino subverts this philosophy even as he tries to establish it. We see that Marana's character reminds the reader that language offers falsifications just as readily as truth. We see that repetition of all those key words at various points in the text helps to identify a theme through which the reader can interpret or attach meaning to the text. So, Calvino's fictions usually hint at worldly truths through a series of patterns. Thus, we can say that this novel is groundbreaking for its intense discussion of the reading experience and for its ability to involve the real life reader, which is something like thoroughly, a kind of a thorough involvement, active involvement of all those real life readers into this meta narrational elements of the plot. So everything that the reader in the novel experiences is experienced by the real life reader as well. The reader is just as much a part of Calvino's story as his character, the reader, is. So we understand, finally, we should say that plot wise, the reader, the real life reader, the reader in the novel, through all those repeated attempts, are finally able to grasp if on a winter's night a traveler. So these are the major points to be discussed about this novel. I repeat, please read the novel and then go through these lectures. If you have any doubts, we will meet for a live class. We'll discuss some more elements in the live class. That's it, girls. Thank you. Have a nice day.